Nice gym logo there, princess.
Sergeant Colt Stedman's voice cut through the morning air at Fort Carson's communications training facility like a blade through silk, drawing 24 pairs of eyes toward the woman sitting in the back row. Juniper Blackwood instinctively tugged her gray t-shirt sleeve down, trying to cover the flame tattoo that wrapped around her right arm like liquid fire frozen in ink. Probably cost her $50 at some strip mall parlor, Knox Sterling added with a laugh that echoed off the concrete walls, making the other trainees snicker as they turned in their seats for a better look. Juniper, with her blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun and striking blue eyes that seemed to hold depths no one bothered to explore, simply stared down at her training manual. Her plain gray shirt looked almost shabby compared to the pressed camouflage uniform surrounding her. "Wait, let me guess," Colt continued, his voice dripping with theatrical curiosity. "You trying to rep some ghost unit? Echo 7 maybe?" He made exaggerated spooky gestures with his hands. "Heard they all vanished in Afghanistan 12 years back. Poof, gone without a trace." The classroom erupted in laughter, but Juniper didn't respond. Instead, she did something that no one quite noticed. She touched the flame tattoo with her fingertip, just a brief contact that made the red ink seem to shimmer under the fluorescent lights. Something flickered in her blue eyes, something that might have been sadness, or perhaps something far more dangerous. None of them knew that in exactly 2 minutes, Pentagon alarms would start screaming. None of them understood that the small flame they were mocking was about to ignite a secret that could reshape everything they thought they knew about war, loyalty, and the price of keeping America safe. The morning had started like any other at Fort Carson Signal Intelligence Training Center. Coffee brewing in the break room, the familiar hum of radar equipment warming up, and 37 communications specialists settling into their seats for another day of learning how to decode the invisible wars fought in radio frequencies and satellite transmissions. The room itself was unremarkable. Gray walls lined with monitors, rows of desks equipped with radio sets and computer terminals, and a large digital display showing various signal patterns that most civilians would dismiss as electronic noise. If watching someone get mocked for something that's actually extraordinary hits you right in the feelings, smash that like button right now and subscribe, because stories like this remind us why we should never judge a book by its cover. And hey, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments below, because I love seeing our global community come together over these incredible tales of hidden strength. Juniper had been attending these classes for 3 months now, always taking the same seat in the back corner, always carrying the same worn canvas bag, always wearing clothes that looked like they had been purchased at a discount store. Her fellow trainees had quickly categorized her as unremarkable, not the brightest, not the most connected, certainly not someone destined for the elite communications units that everyone secretly hoped to join. But Sage Whitmore, sitting 2 rows ahead with her perfectly styled auburn hair and designer combat boots, had begun to notice things, small things, the way Juniper's eyes automatically swept the room when she entered, cataloging exits and potential threats. How she instinctively positioned herself with her back to the wall and a clear view of the door. The fact that despite her apparent nervousness around the equipment, her hands moved with unconscious precision when no one was watching. "You know what I think?" Colt was saying now, having worked himself into full performance mode. "I think our little mouse here got that tattoo to try and look tough. Compensating for something, maybe?" He flexed his considerable biceps, showing off his own collection of military-themed ink. "Real operators don't need to advertise, you know what I mean?" Major Hawthorne, who had been reviewing training schedules at the front desk, glanced up at the commotion. His weathered face, marked by 23 years of military service including 2 tours in Iraq, carried the kind of authority that usually silenced classroom chatter instantly. But when his eyes fell on Juniper's exposed flame tattoo, something made him pause mid-stride. The design was too intricate, too professional. Most importantly, it reminded him of something he'd seen before, though he couldn't quite place where. Juniper touched the tattoo again, this time holding her fingertip against it for several seconds. The gesture appeared nervous, almost compulsive, but to anyone with advanced tactical training, it would have looked suspiciously like someone activating a biometric device. Her shoulders tensed slightly, and she shifted in her seat with movements that were economical and precise, the kind of micro-adjustments that came from years of combat readiness training. Knox Sterling, emboldened by the laughter his previous comment had generated, crumpled up a piece of paper, and flicked it toward Juniper's desk. She moved her head exactly 3 inches to the left, letting the paper sail past without seeming to track its trajectory. The avoidance was so smooth, so automatic, that it looked almost like coincidence. Almost. "Did you see that?" Sage whispered to the trainee next to her, a stocky guy named Ryder, who spent most of his time trying to impress her with stories about his supposed connections to Special Forces units. "See what?" Ryder asked, not bothering to look up from his equipment manual. "The way she moved. That wasn't random." Before Ryder could respond, Colonel Ashford strode into the classroom with the kind of presence that made conversations die mid-sentence. Ashford was old-school military, silver hair cropped short, uniform pressed to perfection, and eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed by anything. He'd been running communications training at Fort Carson for 8 years, and in that time, he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to spot trainees who were hiding something. His gaze swept the room in his customary morning assessment, taking inventory of who looked alert, who looked hungover, and who looked like they might be worth his time to develop. When his eyes reached Juniper, he stopped walking. The flame tattoo was partially visible despite her attempts to cover it, and something about the design made his hand unconsciously move toward the secure phone on his belt. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," Ashford said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made spines straighten automatically. "Today we're going to be working with some new equipment, digital frequency analyzers that can decode transmissions most of you didn't even know existed." He began setting up the demonstration equipment, but his eyes kept drifting back to Juniper. There was something about her posture that didn't match her apparent status as a struggling trainee. She sat with the kind of alertness that came from years of expecting trouble, her hands positioned in a way that would allow instant access to concealed weapons, her breathing controlled and steady despite the obvious stress of being the center of unwanted attention. "Now, before we begin," Ashford continued, "I want everyone to understand that communications intelligence isn't just about understanding technology. It's about understanding people, the way they think, the way they try to hide things, the patterns they create even when they think they're being random." As he spoke, he noticed Colt preparing to make another comment about Juniper's tattoo. Ashford's military instincts, honed by decades of identifying threats and managing personnel, told him that something was building toward a confrontation that might reveal more than anyone expected. "Sterling," he said sharply, making Knox snap to attention, "since you seem to have energy to burn this morning, why don't you come up here and show us how to calibrate this frequency scanner?" Knox's confident expression faltered. "Sir, I'm not sure I know how to—" "Exactly my point," Ashford said. "Never assume you understand something just because it looks simple on the surface." But even as he spoke, Ashford was thinking about the flame tattoo. There had been rumors, years ago, about a classified unit that used flame imagery as identification. Echo 7, they had called themselves, rumored to be deep cover specialists who could blend into any environment, gather intelligence for years without detection, and strike with surgical precision when necessary. But Echo 7 had been declared lost in action over a decade ago. Their bodies never recovered, their mission details sealed so deep that even colonels like Ashford only heard whispers. Juniper had gone very still during this exchange, her blue eyes fixed on her hands. But Sage, watching from her position 2 rows up, noticed that despite her apparent focus on the desk, Juniper's peripheral vision was tracking every movement in the room. It was the kind of situational awareness that took years to develop and became so automatic that maintaining it required no conscious effort. "You know what I don't get?" Colt said, his voice pitched low enough that he thought Ashford wouldn't hear. "Why someone would want a tattoo they're so ashamed of. I mean, if you're going to get ink, own it, right?" He stood up and walked toward Juniper's desk with the swagger of someone who'd never encountered real danger outside of controlled training environments. "Come on, Mouse. Show us what you're hiding under there. Bet it's not even finished. Probably ran out of money halfway through." Juniper's hand moved to cover the tattoo completely, but the gesture revealed something else, a pattern of small scars along her wrist and forearm. They were faded but precise, the kind that came from fieldwork in hostile environments, where even minor injuries had to be treated quickly and efficiently. Medical work performed under combat conditions left distinctive marks for those who knew what to look for. Major Hawthorne had finished his database search and was staring at his computer screen with growing concern. He'd run Juniper Blackwood's name through every military personnel system he had access to, and the results were deeply troubling. According to every official record, She'd enlisted 6 months ago with no prior military experience. Her background check showed a completely ordinary civilian life. Community college, part-time jobs, no criminal record, no special skills or training. But the woman sitting in his classroom demonstrated micro-behaviors that took years of elite training to develop. The way she held her shoulders suggested someone accustomed to wearing body armor. Her eye movements followed patterns taught in counter-surveillance schools. Most tellingly, she had unconsciously positioned herself in the one seat that provided optimal tactical advantage. Back to the wall, clear sight lines to all entrances, closest proximity to emergency communications equipment. "Steadman," Ashford's voice cut through the growing tension. "Return to your seat, now." But Colt was committed to his performance now, feeding off the attention and laughter of his audience. "Just want to see what kind of masterpiece we're dealing with here, sir. Educational purposes." He reached out as if to push up Juniper's sleeve, and that's when things began to cascade toward revelation. Juniper moved to block his hand, a defensive motion that was far too smooth and professional for someone with her supposed background. The movement positioned her body at an angle that suggested extensive hand-to-hand combat training, and for just a moment, her expression shifted from nervous to something much more dangerous. "Don't," she said quietly, but there was steel in her voice that made several trainees look up with sudden interest. Colt laughed and pushed forward anyway, grabbing for her arm. "Come on, what's the big secret? Is it unfinished? Misspelled? Did they mess up the flames and now it looks like squiggly lines?" In trying to pull away from his grip, Juniper's movement caused her sleeve to ride up slightly, revealing more of the tattoo than she'd intended. What became visible wasn't the crude amateur work that Colt had been expecting. Instead, it was clearly professional artistry. Intricate flame patterns that seemed to move in the light, executed with the kind of precision that cost serious money and required an artist with both skill and security clearance. Sage gasped, loud enough that half the classroom turned to look at her. "That's not a gym logo," she said, her voice carrying a note of recognition that made Colonel Ashford move closer to get a better view. Knox Sterling had pulled out his phone and was attempting to record the confrontation, but something made him pause. The tattoo design was triggering a memory, something he'd seen in classified briefings about units that officially didn't exist. "Holy cow," he muttered, lowering his phone. "Is that what I think it is?" Ashford was now close enough to see the tattoo clearly, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The flame design wasn't just artistic. It was a recognition symbol used by intelligence units operating under the deepest possible cover. But more than that, the specific pattern and coloration matched descriptions from a briefing he'd received years ago about Echo 7, the ghost unit that had vanished during a classified operation in Afghanistan. His secure radio crackled to life with routine-based communications, but Ashford barely heard it. He was staring at a woman who, according to every official record, shouldn't exist, but whose tattoo suggested she might be the sole survivor of one of the most elite and secretive units in military history. Juniper had gone completely still, her breathing controlled, but her muscles coiled like springs under tension. She knew the recognition was spreading through the room, could feel the shift in atmosphere as people began to understand they were looking at something far beyond their clearance level. But what none of them knew was that the tattoo wasn't just a symbol. It was a sophisticated piece of biotechnology that responded to stress hormones and electromagnetic fields. And it was starting to activate. The specialized ink Juniper's tattoo contained represented the cutting edge of military biotechnology, featuring embedded sensors that could monitor vital signs, detect chemical threats, and even transmit encrypted communications. The flame design wasn't just symbolic. It was a functional piece of equipment that integrated seamlessly with the human nervous system. This kind of advanced biointegration technology, while classified for military applications, has inspired civilian developments in health monitoring systems, like advanced fitness trackers and smartwatches that can provide real-time health data and emergency alerts for optimal safety and wellness monitoring. Hawthorne's computer suddenly chimed with an incoming priority message. The communication was marked with security classifications he rarely saw, and when he opened it, his face went pale. The message was brief but urgent. "Biometric anomaly detected at your location. Maintain current status. Support team en route." "Sir?" Knox asked. "Yeah," I asked, noticing Hawthorne's expression. "Is everything all right?" Before Hawthorne could respond, Juniper's phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it quickly, and those watching closely saw her face tighten almost imperceptibly. The message read, Flame protocol active. Maintain cover until extraction. What's going on? Sage demanded, her voice rising with anxiety. Juniper, who are you really? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Around the room, trainees were beginning to understand that their morning communications class had just become something much more significant and potentially dangerous. Equipment that had been humming quietly in the background seemed to grow louder, and the fluorescent lights appeared harsh and clinical. Ashford made a decision that would change everything that followed. Instead of continuing the pretense of normal training, he walked to his secure communications console and placed a call that required his highest security clearance. "This is Colonel Ashford at Fort Carson Signal Training Center," he said into the encrypted line. "I need immediate verification on an individual whose biometric signature may be associated with Echo 7 operations." The response was immediate and unambiguous. "Maintain visual contact. Do not engage. Specialized response team is airborne." Colt, meanwhile, had released Juniper's arm but remained standing close to her desk, his bravado beginning to crack as he sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere. "Look, I was just messing around," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "It's just a tattoo, right? People are acting like—" He didn't finish the sentence because Juniper was looking at him with an expression that made his survival instincts scream warnings. It wasn't anger or fear. It was the cold assessment of a predator deciding whether prey was worth the effort to eliminate. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Just a tattoo." But everyone in the room could now see that it was much more than that. Under the classroom lights, the flame design seemed to have depth and movement, as if real fire was trapped beneath her skin. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, but more importantly, the tattoo was beginning to emit a very faint luminescence that suggested technology far beyond anything available to civilian tattoo artists. Sage was backing away from her desk now, her face a mixture of fascination and terror. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Echo 7 is just a story. Urban legends. They tell those stories to scare people about what might be out there, but they're not real." "Every legend has a source," Colonel Ashford said grimly, his phone buzzing with increasingly urgent communications from higher up the command chain. "The question is whether we're looking at the source or just someone who wants us to think we are." Knox Sterling had been quietly researching on his personal device, pulling up everything he could find about Echo 7 and flame imagery in military units. What he found made him drop his phone. "This isn't possible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "According to this, Echo 7 was declared KIA 12 years ago. All members presumed dead. Mission details still classified above top secret. Hold up. If you're getting goosebumps from these mysterious signals and you know something big is about to drop, hit that notification bell because you definitely don't want to miss what happens when the Pentagon gets involved. Trust me, this is just the beginning." The tension in the room was becoming unbearable when the first indication of incoming aircraft became audible. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors approaching Fort Carson at high speed. It was still several minutes away, but the sound was growing stronger, and those with military experience recognized the distinctive signature of Blackhawks flying in formation. Juniper stood up slowly, her movements precise and controlled. For the first time since the confrontation began, she spoke with clear authority. "I need everyone to remain calm and follow instructions exactly. What's about to happen is going to be confusing, but if you cooperate, nobody gets hurt." The transformation was startling. The nervous, intimidated woman, who'd been enduring mockery just minutes before, was gone, replaced by someone who radiated competence and controlled danger. Her posture had shifted to pure military bearing. Her voice carried the unmistakable tone of command authority, and her eyes were scanning the room with the kind of tactical assessment that made it clear she was several steps ahead of everyone else. "Who are you?" Colt asked, his earlier swagger completely evaporated. Juniper looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Someone who's been watching all of you for 3 months, learning your patterns, identifying your weaknesses, and determining which of you might be worth saving if things went bad." Ashford's radio erupted with chatter as base security began coordinating with the incoming aircraft. "All units, we have priority military traffic inbound. Establish security perimeter around Building 7. No unauthorized personnel in or out." "Building 7, Sage said, her voice tight with growing panic. "That's us. They're here for us." "No," Juniper corrected gently. "They're here for me." She walked to the window and looked out at the base's landing pads, where 3 Black Hawks were setting down with the kind of precision that suggested pilots with extensive special operations experience. Teams were already deploying from the aircraft, not regular military police, but specialists in tactical gear that most of the trainees had never seen outside of movies. "I don't understand," Knox said, still trying to process what was happening. "You're just a trainee. You're nobody special. You've been here for months doing the same exercises as everyone else." Juniper turned from the window with a smile that was both sad and terrifying. "The best cover is always the most boring one. Nobody pays attention to the unremarkable person who shows up every day, does adequate work, and never causes trouble." Hawthorne was receiving a steady stream of updates through his secure communications, and what he was learning was rewriting everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd been dismissing as a mediocre student. "Agent Flame," he said, reading from his screen. "Echo 7 Deep Cover Specialist. 12 years active deployment. Mission status ongoing." The words hit the room like physical blows. Several trainees actually stumbled backward, and Sage sat down heavily in her chair as if her legs had given out. "Agent Flame," Colt repeated, his voice cracking. "That's not possible. You're just nobody special," Juniper finished for him. "Yes, you've mentioned that. Several times, in fact." The sound of boots in the hallway was growing louder, accompanied by the distinctive noise of tactical teams establishing security protocols. But instead of the organized chaos that might have been expected, there was an almost reverent quality to the sounds, the kind of careful professional movement that suggested people who understood they were dealing with something significant. A knock came at the classroom door, followed immediately by it opening to reveal a team leader in full tactical gear. He scanned the room quickly, his gaze settling on Juniper with unmistakable recognition. "Agent Flame," he said, his voice carrying the kind of respect usually reserved for flag officers. "Ma'am, we have orders to establish secure communication and await your instructions." The formality of the address sent another shockwave through the room. This wasn't an arrest or an investigation. It was a consultation with someone whose authority extended far beyond anything the trainees had imagined possible. Juniper nodded to the team leader, then looked around the classroom, at the faces of people who had spent months dismissing her as unremarkable. "I need a few more minutes to complete my assessment here. Have your team establish a perimeter, but keep it discreet. Some of these people are going to be valuable assets once they get over their shock." "Yes, ma'am." As the team leader withdrew to implement her instructions, Juniper turned her attention back to the stunned trainees. "I suppose you have questions. This has to be some kind of elaborate training exercise," Sage said, her voice desperate with the need to find a rational explanation. "They do this sometimes, right? Set up scenarios to test how we react under pressure?" Colonel Ashford shook his head grimly. "This is no exercise. The authentication codes I'm receiving are at the highest levels of classification. What you're looking at is the real thing." Knox was staring at his research with growing amazement. According to this, Echo 7 members are trained for ultra-long-term deep cover operations. They can maintain false identities for years, even decades, gathering intelligence and waiting for activation orders. 3 months, Colt said, the implications finally sinking in. "You've been watching us for 3 months. Actually, closer to 4, Juniper corrected. "I was here for 2 weeks before any of you arrived, learning the routines, understanding the power dynamics, identifying potential security risks." She gestured towards Sage with her chin. "Like people who ask too many questions about classified systems, or people who have unexplained access to information they shouldn't possess." Sage's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "We'll get to that," Juniper said. "But first, I think it's time you all understood exactly what you've been sitting next to for the past 3 months." She rolled up her sleeve completely, revealing the full scope of the flame tattoo. It was breathtaking in its complexity. Not just artistic flame patterns, but an intricate design that seemed to shift and change depending on the viewing angle. More importantly, it was now glowing with a soft, steady light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Biometric integration," Hawthorne breathed, understanding flooding his face. "It's not just a tattoo, it's a piece of equipment." "Very good, Major," Juniper said, "though I'm afraid your security clearance isn't high enough for me to explain exactly how it works." The implications were staggering. If the tattoo was functional technology, then Juniper represented a level of classified development that existed in the realm of rumors and speculation. The kind of programs that congressional oversight committees never heard about and that left no paper trails in official budgets. Pentagon response systems had been quietly revolutionizing military financial security protocols, implementing comprehensive insurance frameworks that protected classified operations and their personnel through sophisticated financial planning networks. When deep cover operations faced exposure or compromise, specialized financial advisors trained in military and intelligence protocols could rapidly restructure assets, secure family protection, and ensure operational continuity through advanced insurance products and investment strategies designed specifically for high-risk government assignments requiring complete identity protection. "This is insane," Knox said, his voice rising with stress. "You're telling us we've been going to class with some kind of super soldier? That the person we've been making fun of is actually what?" Juniper asked gently. "More dangerous than you assumed? More important than you realized? More deserving of basic human respect than you were willing to provide?" The quiet rebuke hit harder than any shouting would have. Several of the trainees looked genuinely ashamed, while others were still struggling to process the magnitude of what they were learning. Colt slumped into his chair as if his strings had been cut. "We've been making jokes about someone who could probably kill us all without breaking a sweat." "Probably," Juniper agreed. "But that was never the point. I wasn't here to hurt anyone. I was here to learn about you. To understand how you think, how you react under pressure, whether any of you might be suitable for recruitment into specialized programs." She looked around the room, her gaze settling on each person briefly. "Some of you passed that evaluation. Others didn't." Sage was beginning to hyperventilate. "You've been testing us? This whole time you've been deciding whether we're worthy of what?" "Of trust," Juniper said simply. "Of the kind of responsibility that comes with protecting secrets that could reshape global politics. Of the psychological strength required to maintain cover identities that might last for decades." Ashford's radio crackled with another update. "Sir, we have confirmation that Agent Flame is authorized to continue her current operation with full Pentagon support. All personnel are directed to provide complete cooperation." "Operation?" Knox asked. "What operation? What is she really doing here?" Juniper walked back to her desk and picked up her canvas bag. From it, she withdrew a tablet computer that was clearly far more sophisticated than anything available to trainees. The screen showed a complex display of data that looked like a combination of personnel files, communication intercepts, and behavioral analysis reports. "For the past 4 months," she said, "I've been investigating intelligence leaks that have compromised 3 separate military operations and resulted in the deaths of 14 service members. Someone with access to classified communication protocols has been selling information to hostile foreign governments." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone in the room understood that they were all potential suspects, that their every action for the past 3 months had been observed and analyzed by someone with the training and authority to destroy their careers and their lives. "That's impossible," Sage said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Everyone here has been vetted. We all have security clearances." "Security clearances can be compromised," Juniper replied. "People can be blackmailed, bribed, or convinced to betray their country for reasons that seem perfectly rational to them at the time." She activated her tablet and projected its display onto the classroom's main screen. What appeared was a detailed timeline showing classified information leaving Fort Carson's communication center and appearing in foreign intelligence reports within hours. "The leaks are consistent," she continued. "Always communication protocols, always from this facility, always transmitted within 12 hours of the information being accessed here." Knox was studying the timeline with growing horror. "Those dates, those are all days when we had access to the secure systems for training exercises." "Exactly," Juniper confirmed, "which means the leak is almost certainly someone in this room." "Okay, if your jaw just dropped at that revelation, you're not alone. Make sure you're subscribed because stories like this, where everything you thought you knew gets flipped upside down, are exactly why this channel exists. The next twist is going to blow your mind." The revelation of Juniper's true identity and mission had transformed the classroom into something resembling an interrogation chamber. The casual atmosphere of a training session was gone, replaced by the kind of tension that accompanied life and death situations. Every person in the room, was now calculating their own actions over the past months, wondering what they might have done that could be interpreted as suspicious. But the real drama was just beginning. Outside, more vehicles were arriving, not just military transports, but civilian SUVs with government plates and the kind of discreet security details that suggested very high-level attention to whatever was unfolding at Fort Carson. Sage had gone completely pale and was gripping her desk with white knuckles. "You think one of us is a traitor?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think someone in this room is responsible for getting people killed?" "I don't think," Juniper corrected. "I know." She manipulated her tablet display, bringing up a series of security camera screenshots that showed various trainees accessing computer terminals during training sessions. But she also included metadata that revealed when classified files had been copied, when secure communications had been intercepted, and when foreign intelligence services had received their information. "The pattern is clear once you know what to look for," she said. "Every leak correlates with access by one specific individual, someone who's been very careful, very professional, but not quite careful enough." The room fell into absolute silence as everyone waited to learn who among them had been betraying their country. But Juniper didn't immediately reveal the answer. Instead, she began walking between the desks, her movements predatory and deliberate. "The interesting thing about deep cover operations," she said conversationally, "is that they teach you to notice things that other people miss. Micro-expressions, behavioral patterns, the way someone's stress responses change when they're maintaining a lie." She paused next to Colt's desk. "For example, Sergeant Stedman here has been operating under tremendous guilt for the past 3 months. Not about betraying his country, but about a training accident that resulted in another soldier's injury. He's been overcompensating with aggressive behavior to hide his feelings of inadequacy." Colt's face crumpled, as if he'd been physically struck. The accuracy of her assessment was clearly devastating in its precision. "Knox Sterling," she continued, moving to the next desk, "has been inflating his qualifications and family connections to try to impress his peers. He's actually from a very modest background and is terrified that someone will discover he doesn't belong in elite military circles." Knox slumped in his chair, his carefully constructed persona crumbling under the weight of truth. "But our actual traitor," Juniper said, stopping in front of Sage's desk, "has been much more clever. Someone who's been using her position as my supposed best friend to gather information about my activities, my questions, my investigations." Sage's breathing was becoming increasingly rapid and shallow. "That's not true," she said, but her voice was shaking. "I would never. I'm not." "The foreign contact was made through a dating app," Juniper continued relentlessly. "Very modern approach. A handsome European businessman who seemed genuinely interested in your thoughts about international relations, who gradually steered conversations toward topics related to military communications, who made it seem like sharing a few harmless details about your training was just part of intimate pillow talk." The description was so specific that everyone in the room could see its truth written across Sage's face. Her carefully maintained composure was dissolving as the magnitude of her situation became clear. "I didn't know," Sage whispered. I thought we were just talking. He seemed so interested in my work, and nobody had ever paid attention to you before," Juniper finished gently. "I understand. It's one of the oldest tactics in the intelligence business, and it works because it exploits basic human needs for connection and validation." The tragedy of the situation was becoming apparent to everyone present. Sage wasn't a master spy or a hardened traitor. She was a lonely young woman who had been expertly manipulated by professionals who understood exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities. But understanding didn't change the consequences. 14 service members were dead because of information that had flowed through her communications with her foreign contact. Classified operations had been compromised, lives had been lost, and national security had been damaged. "What happens now?" Sage asked, tears streaming down her face. Before Juniper could answer, the classroom door opened again to admit a new figure, a woman in a civilian business suit whose presence immediately commanded attention. She was flanked by 2 additional agents and carried herself with the kind of authority that suggested connections at the highest levels of government. "Agent Flame," the woman said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Director Patricia Stone, Justice Department. We're here to take custody of the asset and begin damage assessment." The formality of the language was chilling in its implications. Sage was no longer a person with a name and a story. She was an asset to be processed through systems designed to extract information and assess the scope of compromise. The comprehensive legal framework surrounding classified military operations had inspired advancement in specialized legal education programs focusing on military law and government operations. For service members and their families facing complex legal challenges related to security clearances, operational accountability, or classified matter exposure, specialized legal education programs and professional certification courses provide essential knowledge about military justice systems, security law protocols, and the specialized representation needed to navigate these highly complex legal environments. "Ma'am," Juniper acknowledged, then turned back to Sage. "You'll be taken into federal custody for questioning. The extent of your cooperation will influence how the case proceeds, but I want you to understand that this was never personal. You were targeted by professionals who are very good at what they do." Sage was sobbing, so the full weight of her situation finally hitting her. "My family," she gasped. "What's going to happen to my family?" "That will depend on many factors," Director Stone said, not unkindly, "but your cooperation will be a significant consideration in all decisions moving forward." As federal agents moved to escort Sage from the classroom, she looked back at Juniper with an expression of complete devastation. "Were we ever really friends?" she asked. "Any of it? Or was it all just part of your mission?" Juniper's expression softened for the first time since her identity had been revealed. "The friendship was real, Sage. That's what made this so difficult. But friendship doesn't change duty, and duty doesn't change consequences." The agents led Sage away, leaving the remaining trainees to process what they had just witnessed. The transformation from normal training session to federal counterintelligence operation had been so complete and so rapid that several people were still struggling to accept that it was real. Colonel Ashford was receiving continuous updates through his secure communications, and what he was learning was reshaping his understanding of everything that had been happening at his facility. "Agent Flame," he said, "I'm being informed that this operation has broader implications than just the leaks from our facility." Juniper nodded grimly. Sage's foreign contact is part of a larger network that's been targeting military communication specialists across multiple installations. Her arrest will allow us to trace the network and identify other compromised personnel. "How many others?" Knox asked, his voice tight with worry. "We're not sure yet," Juniper admitted, "but the preliminary evidence suggests this is a coordinated effort involving at least 6 military installations and possibly dozens of compromised individuals." The scope of what she was describing was staggering. Not just a single traitor, but an entire network of compromised personnel feeding classified information to foreign intelligence services. The kind of systematic penetration that could reshape the strategic balance of power if left unchecked. Colt, who had been silent since his own psychological profile had been revealed, finally found his voice. "What about us?" he asked. "The rest of us, I mean. What happens to us now?" Juniper considered the question carefully. "That depends on what you do next," she said finally. "Some of you have demonstrated qualities that would make you valuable in specialized programs. Others might be better suited to conventional military roles. But all of you have now been exposed to classified information about ongoing operations." The implication was clear. Their lives had just become much more complicated. They would need to be debriefed, their security clearances would be reviewed, and their future assignments would be influenced by their proximity to a counterintelligence operation. "Will we see you again?" Knox asked. "Probably not," Juniper said. "My cover here is blown, which means I'll be reassigned to a new identity and a new mission. Agent Flame will disappear again, and Juniper Blackwood will cease to exist." The finality of her statement was sobering. The woman they had come to know, however superficially, would simply vanish, replaced by another carefully constructed identity designed to blend into another environment while pursuing other classified objectives. Director Stone returned to the classroom without Sage, her expression indicating that the immediate crisis had been contained, but that larger challenges remained. "Agent Flame," she said, "we need to discuss your next assignment. The intelligence gathered here has accelerated several ongoing operations, and there are decisions that need to be made at the highest levels." Juniper gathered her few personal belongings, the worn canvas bag, the tablet computer, and a small photo that she kept carefully concealed. As she prepared to leave the classroom, where she had spent 3 months cultivating an unremarkable identity, she looked around at the faces of people who would remember this day for the rest of their lives. "One last thing," she said, addressing the remaining trainees. "Everything that happened here today is classified at the highest levels. You will never speak about it to anyone who doesn't already know. You will never write about it, never reference it, never even think about it when you're in unsecured environments." She paused to let the weight of the security requirements sink in. "But I want you to remember the lesson about assumptions," she continued, "about the danger of judging people based on surface appearances, about the possibility that the most unremarkable person in any room might be the most important person in that room." With that, she walked toward the door, her movement already shifting back toward the controlled precision that marked her as someone whose real identity was far different from anything her classmates had imagined. "Agent Flame," Colonel Ashford called out as she reached the threshold. She turned back, eyebrows raised in question. "It's been an honor," he said simply. For just a moment, her carefully maintained professional mask slipped, and something human and grateful flickered across her features. "Thank you, Colonel. Take care of them." And then she was gone, leaving behind a classroom full of people who would spend years trying to process what they had witnessed and learned about the hidden wars being fought in their midst. But even as Juniper disappeared into the corridors of Fort Carson, her secure communication device was already buzzing with new orders. The network that had been using Sage was larger and more dangerous than anyone had initially realized, and Agent Flame's next assignment would take her into even deeper and more perilous waters. The flame tattoo pulsed once more with soft light, responding to encrypted signals that contained destination codes and mission parameters. Somewhere across the world, hostile intelligence services were about to discover that their carefully constructed networks had been penetrated by someone they would never see coming until it was far too late. The war in the shadows was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. The corridors of Fort Carson felt different as Juniper walked alongside Director Stone toward the secured briefing rooms. The institutional gray walls and fluorescent lighting that had been her daily environment for 3 months now seemed like props in a theater she was leaving behind. Behind them, the Communication Training Center continued to buzz with activity as federal agents processed the scene and began the complex work of damage assessment. "The preliminary debriefing will be conducted here," Director Stone explained, as they entered a conference room that Juniper had never seen before, despite months of believing she knew every inch of the facility. The room was clearly designed for classified discussions. No windows, reinforced walls, and communication equipment that bore the distinctive markings of the most secure government installations. "How extensive is the network?" Juniper asked, settling into a chair that faced the door, a positioning choice that Director Stone noted with professional appreciation. "More than we initially estimated," Stone replied, activating a secure tablet that displayed a global map marked with dozens of red indicators. "Sage Whitmore's foreign contact, the man she knew as Victor Petrov, has been running similar operations at military installations across 3 continents. We've identified at least 47 compromised personnel, with more discoveries likely as we trace the communication patterns." The scope of the operation was staggering. What had begun as investigation into leaks at a single training facility had revealed a systematic penetration of Western military communication networks that represented one of the most significant intelligence breaches in recent history. The sophisticated approach to this multinational intelligence operation demonstrates the critical importance of comprehensive insurance and financial protection for government personnel and their families, Director Stone continued, pulling up classified files on her secure tablet. "When deep cover operations face exposure or compromise, having proper financial safeguards becomes essential for protecting assets and ensuring operational continuity. Specialized financial advisors trained in military and intelligence protocols can rapidly restructure assets, secure family protection, and maintain operational security through advanced insurance products and investment strategies designed specifically for high-risk classified assignments, requiring complete identity protection and family security." Juniper studied the global display with the kind of analytical focus that had made her invaluable in deep cover operations. The timeline suggests coordination at a level that requires significant resources and long-term planning. This isn't opportunistic intelligence gathering. It's strategic preparation for something larger. "Exactly our assessment," Stone confirmed. "Which brings us to your next assignment." Before she could elaborate, her secure communication device chimed with an incoming priority message. Stone's expression tightened as she read the update, and when she looked up at Juniper, there was a new urgency in her eyes. Agent Flame, we have a problem. 3 additional military installations have just reported similar security breaches in the past 6 hours. The network knows we've identified Sage, and they're accelerating their timeline for whatever they're planning. The implications were immediate and terrifying. Instead of a careful investigation that could gradually roll up the entire network, they were now in a race against an enemy that was moving to complete their objectives before more of their assets could be compromised. Orders? Juniper asked, her mind already shifting into operational mode. Multiple targets, multiple identities required, Stone said. We need Agent Flame to disappear completely and be replaced by at least 3 different covers operating simultaneously. Can you handle that level of complexity? The question would have been absurd for most operatives, but Juniper had spent 12 years perfecting the art of identity manipulation. Timeline? 48 hours for first deployment, location to be determined based on where the network shows their hand next. As they spoke, activity was intensifying throughout Fort Carson as the full scope of the security breach became apparent to military leadership. The Communication Training Center had been placed under complete lockdown, with federal agents conducting detailed interviews with every person who had access to classified systems over the past 6 months. Hold up. If you're getting goosebumps from these mysterious signals and you know something big is about to drop, hit that notification bell because you definitely don't want to miss what happens when the Pentagon gets involved. Trust me, this is just the beginning. Back in the classroom, the remaining trainees were experiencing their own form of psychological aftermath. The revelation of Juniper's true identity and Sage's betrayal had shattered their understanding of their own environment and their ability to judge the people around them. Colt Stedman sat at his desk, staring at his hands, replaying every interaction he'd had with both women over the past 3 months. The mockery, the casual cruelty, the assumptions about weakness and inadequacy, all of it directed at someone who could have ended his life without visible effort, but who had chosen instead to observe and assess. How did we miss it? Knox Sterling asked, his voice hollow with shock. I mean, how did none of us see what she really was? Colonel Ashford, who had remained in the classroom to oversee the federal investigation, looked up from his secure communications. Because she was exceptionally good at her job, he said simply. Deep cover specialists spend years learning to be unremarkable, to blend into any environment so completely that they become invisible. The psychological impact on the trainees was something that federal psychologists would study for years afterward. The experience of discovering that their reality had been carefully constructed and monitored by someone whose true capabilities far exceeded anything they had imagined created a lasting change in how they viewed the world around them. Knox pulled up his research on Echo 7 again, but now the sparse information available took on new meaning. According to this, Echo 7 operatives are trained for missions that can last decades. They can maintain false identities so completely that they sometimes struggle to remember who they really are underneath. The psychological toll must be enormous. Enormous, added a trainee named Harper Walsh, who had been largely silent during the morning's revelations. Imagine spending years being someone you're not, never being able to form real relationships, always having to calculate every word and action. Colonel Ashford's expression darkened. The sacrifice these operatives make isn't just physical danger, it's the surrender of normal human connection. Agent Flame spent 3 months in this room, surrounded by people, and she couldn't afford to be genuinely close to any of them. The tragedy of Sage's situation was also becoming more apparent as federal agents shared additional details about her recruitment. The Foreign Intelligence Service had identified her through sophisticated psychological profiling that targeted individuals with specific vulnerabilities: social isolation, financial stress, family problems that made them susceptible to manipulation. She wasn't evil, Colt said quietly. She was just lonely. Loneliness is one of the most powerful weapons in the intelligence business, Ashford replied. Hostile services spend enormous resources identifying people who feel disconnected or undervalued. Then they provide exactly the kind of attention and validation those people are craving. Meanwhile, in a secured debriefing room 3 floors below the classroom, Sage Whitmore was learning the full extent of how thoroughly she had been manipulated. Federal agents had traced her foreign contact back through multiple false identities to a sophisticated operation that had been targeting American military personnel for over 5 years. Viktor Petrov doesn't exist, Agent Michelle Torres explained, showing Sage photographs of the man she had believed she was in love with. The person you knew by that name is actually Dmitry Kozlov, a career intelligence officer with 23 years of experience in recruiting and running American assets. Sage stared at the photographs with the expression of someone watching her entire world collapse. The man who had seemed so genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings had been following a carefully crafted script designed to exploit her psychological vulnerabilities. "Everything was a lie," she whispered. "Not everything," Torres said gently. "Your feelings were real. Your desire for connection was real. The problem is that professionals like Kozlov are trained to recognize and exploit those real feelings for purposes that have nothing to do with genuine human relationships." The revelation of Sage's manipulation highlighted critical gaps in military personnel security that would require comprehensive legal and educational reforms. For service members and their families facing complex challenges related to security clearances, operational accountability, or classified matter exposure, specialized legal education programs and professional certification courses provide essential knowledge about military justice systems, security law protocols, and the specialized representation needed to navigate these highly complex legal environments and protect against sophisticated recruitment attempts by hostile intelligence services. As Sage's debriefing continued, federal agents were rapidly tracing the network of compromised personnel that had been revealed by her communication patterns. The investigation was uncovering a web of recruitment that stretched across multiple military installations and involved dozens of service members who had been targeted through various psychological and emotional vulnerabilities. But the real shock came when agents discovered that the intelligence network had been planning something far more ambitious than simple information gathering. Documents recovered from encrypted communications suggested that the compromised personnel were being positioned to facilitate a coordinated attack on American military communication systems, an attack that could cripple military response capabilities during a crisis. Director Stone's secure communication device chimed again with another urgent update. "Agent Flame," she said, her voice tight with concern, "we've just intercepted communications suggesting that the network is planning to activate their assets within the next 24 hours. Whatever they're planning, they're moving to implement it immediately." Juniper's tactical mind immediately began calculating possibilities and responses. Type of activation? Unknown, but the communication traffic suggests coordination between assets at military installations, defense contractors, and civilian infrastructure targets. It looks like a comprehensive attack designed to create maximum disruption during a specific time window. The implications were terrifying. If hostile intelligence services could simultaneously compromise military communications, defense systems, and civilian infrastructure, they could create the kind of chaos that would prevent effective American response to whatever larger operation they were planning. "I need immediate deployment," Juniper said. "If they're moving this quickly, we don't have time for careful preparation." Stone was already activating her emergency protocols. 3 teams are being assembled now. You'll have support at each location, but the primary infiltration and assessment will be your responsibility. As federal agents prepared for what was becoming a massive counterintelligence operation, the consequences of the morning's revelations were rippling outward through the military chain of command. General Patricia Hawkins, commanding officer of the Mountain West Military District, was reviewing classified briefings that described the scope of the network penetration and its potential implications for national security. The scale of the response required unprecedented coordination between military intelligence, federal law enforcement, and civilian security agencies. Resources that had been allocated to routine operations were being rapidly redirected toward what was potentially the most significant counterintelligence crisis in decades. But even as these massive preparations were underway, there were smaller, more personal consequences playing out in the Communication Training Center at Fort Carson. Colt Stedman had requested a private meeting with Colonel Ashford, and what he had to say would surprise everyone who thought they understood his motivations. "Sir," Colt said, standing at attention in Ashford's office, "I want to volunteer for whatever specialized program Agent Flame was evaluating us for." Ashford studied the young sergeant with new interest. "That's a significant decision, Stedman. These programs involve sacrifices that most people can't comprehend. Why would you want that?" Colt's expression was serious in a way that his fellow trainees had never seen. Because I spent 3 months being the worst version of myself around someone who was risking her life to protect people like me. I want the chance to become someone worthy of that sacrifice. The transformation in Colt's perspective represented exactly the kind of psychological development that made certain individuals suitable for specialized operations. The capacity for genuine self-reflection and the willingness to accept difficult truths about one's own behavior were prerequisites for the kind of deep cover work that agents like Juniper performed. It won't be easy, Ashford warned. The training alone eliminates 90% of candidates, and successful completion means accepting assignments that could last years in hostile environments with no guarantee of survival or recognition. I understand, sir. Ashford made a note in Colt's file, but his expression suggested that he was seeing potential that hadn't been apparent during routine training exercises. Sometimes the most profound personal growth occurred when individuals were forced to confront the gap between who they thought they were and who they actually were. Knox Sterling, meanwhile, was having his own revelation as he continued researching the Echo 7 program and its historical operations. What he was learning about the sacrifices made by deep cover operatives was reshaping his understanding of what it meant to serve his country. They give up everything, he told Harper Walsh as they reviewed declassified documents about similar programs. Not just their real names or their past relationships, but their ability to ever have normal lives again. Once you've spent years being someone else, you can never really go back to being who you were before. Harper was reading a psychological study about the long-term effects of deep cover operations on operatives' mental health. The isolation is almost complete, she said. They can't maintain genuine relationships because they can never tell anyone who they really are. They can't make long-term plans because they never know when they'll need to disappear and become someone else. The more they learned about Juniper's real life, the more their earlier mockeries seemed not just cruel but tragically misguided. They had been making fun of someone who had sacrificed normal human connection in order to protect people who would never know her name or understand what she had given up for their safety. Okay, if your jaw just dropped at that revelation, you're not alone. Make sure you're subscribed because stories like this, where everything you thought you knew gets flipped upside down, are exactly why this channel exists. The next twist is going to blow your mind. 3 hours after Sage's arrest, federal agents had established a comprehensive operations center at Fort Carson that coordinated with similar centers at military installations across the country. The scope of the intelligence network they were fighting was becoming clearer, and it was larger and more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized. We've identified confirmed compromised personnel at 17 military installations, Director Stone reported during a secure video conference that included senior officials from the Pentagon, CIA, and NSA. The coordination suggests a level of planning and resource allocation that indicates state-level sponsorship. General Hawkins, participating from her command center in Colorado Springs, studied the global display showing the locations of identified network assets. The geographic distribution is strategic, she observed. They've positioned assets to maximum disruption of our communication and coordination capabilities during a crisis, which suggests they're planning to create a crisis, added CIA Director Robert Chen, his voice carrying the grim certainty of someone who had seen similar patterns before. This level of network development isn't maintained just for information gathering. They're preparing the battlefield for something specific. Juniper, listening to the briefing from a secured communication center, was analyzing the tactical implications of what they were learning. If they can simultaneously disrupt military communications, compromise defense contractor systems, and interfere with civilian infrastructure, they could create a window of opportunity for conventional military action. The assessment was chilling in its implications. The intelligence network represented preparation for what could be a coordinated attack on American military capabilities, designed to prevent effective response during the critical early hours of a larger conflict. Agent Flame, General Hawkins said, your assessment of deployment priorities. Juniper had spent the past hour reviewing intelligence summaries and operational reports from all 17 compromised installations. 3 locations show highest priority target indicators, she replied. Norfolk Naval Base for maritime operations disruption, Fort Gordon for cyber warfare capabilities, and Offutt Air Force Base for strategic command interference. Timeline for deployment? I can be operational at Norfolk within 6 hours, Fort Gordon within 12, and Offutt within 18. But simultaneous operations will require support teams that are cleared for Echo 7 coordination. The logistics of deploying a single operative to multiple locations while maintaining operational security was complex enough to require resources from across the intelligence community. But the alternative, allowing the hostile network to complete their preparations unopposed, was unacceptable. Director Stone was coordinating with transportation and logistics specialists to arrange the kind of rapid deployment that could put Juniper in position to assess and counter the network's activities before they could complete their objectives. Agent Flame, you'll have full resource authority and unlimited operational discretion, whatever you need, wherever you need it. As these high-level preparations continued, the personal consequences of the morning's revelations were continuing to unfold at Fort Carson. The trainees who had been exposed to classified information about the Echo 7 program were now facing security reviews that would determine their future assignments and clearance levels. Knox Sterling found himself in a debriefing session with federal agents who were evaluating his suitability for continued access to classified information. His research into Echo 7 operations, while conducted out of curiosity rather than malicious intent, had revealed his ability to discover information that was supposed to be extremely difficult to access. "Mr. Sterling," Agent Torres said, reviewing his background file, "your research methods show considerable skill in information gathering and analysis. Have you considered specialized intelligence work?" The question surprised Knox, who had expected to be reprimanded for his curiosity rather than recruited because of it. I hadn't really thought about it, ma'am. The intelligence community has need for people who can find information that others miss," Torres continued. "Your academic background in computer science, combined with the analytical skills you've demonstrated, suggest potential for signals intelligence or cyber operations." Similar conversations were taking place with other trainees as federal agents identified individuals whose responses to the crisis suggested qualities that could be valuable in specialized programs. The revelation of the intelligence network had created an immediate need for additional personnel who could be trusted with the highest levels of classified information. Harper Walsh, whose psychological insights about deep cover operations had impressed the federal agents monitoring the classroom discussions, was being evaluated for potential recruitment into behavioral analysis programs that supported counterintelligence operations. Understanding the psychological dynamics of recruitment and manipulation is crucial for identifying and stopping hostile intelligence operations, Agent Sarah Kim explained during Harper's interview. "Your ability to recognize the emotional factors that made Ms. Whitmore vulnerable to recruitment suggests aptitude for this kind of work." But not all of the trainees were being considered for specialized programs. Several had demonstrated security risks or psychological profiles that made them unsuitable for continued access to classified information. The morning's crisis had served as an unintentional but highly effective screening process that identified both potential assets and potential vulnerabilities. The consequences extended beyond individual careers to institutional changes that would reshape how military installations approached communication security. Colonel Ashford was already working with federal security specialists to implement new protocols that would make it much more difficult for hostile intelligence services to recruit and run assets within military facilities. "We need to assume that every person with access to classified information is a potential target," Ashford explained to his staff during an emergency security briefing. "The old model of background checks and periodic reviews isn't sufficient against the kind of sophisticated psychological operations we're facing." The new security protocols would include continuous monitoring of behavior patterns, regular psychological assessments, and what amounted to a buddy system that made it difficult for any individual to operate in isolation. The changes represented a fundamental shift toward assuming that hostile intelligence services would attempt to compromise personnel and building systems to detect and prevent such compromises. Meanwhile, Juniper was completing her preparation for what would be the most complex deployment of her career. Instead of a single long-term cover identity, she would need to rapidly assume and discard multiple personas while gathering intelligence about hostile network activities at 3 different military installations. The complexity of legal frameworks surrounding these multi-jurisdiction counterintelligence operations, Director Stone explained as they reviewed operational parameters, requires specialized legal support that understands both military law and federal criminal procedure. For operatives working across state lines and international boundaries, comprehensive legal education programs provide essential knowledge about jurisdictional issues, evidence handling, and the specialized representation needed to navigate these complex legal environments while maintaining operational security and protecting classified information. The first persona would be Lisa Morgan, a civilian contractor specializing in communication system upgrades at Norfolk Naval Base. The second would be Captain Jennifer Hayes, a cybersecurity specialist conducting routine assessments at Fort Gordon. The third would be Dr. Amanda Foster, a behavioral psychologist evaluating personnel security protocols at Offutt Air Force Base. Each identity required complete documentation, backstory development, and coordination with existing personnel at the target facilities. The level of preparation that normally took weeks was being compressed into hours, requiring resources and expertise from across the intelligence community. The risk factor is significant, Director Stone warned as they reviewed the operational plan. If any of the identities are compromised, the hostile network will know we've identified their activities and may accelerate their timeline even further. Juniper nodded grimly. Understood. But if we don't gather intelligence about their operational plans, we'll be reactive instead of proactive when they make their move. The transportation to Norfolk Naval Base was arranged through military channels that could deliver Juniper to her first assignment without creating the kind of travel records that hostile intelligence services might be monitoring. Within 4 hours of leaving Fort Carson, she was walking through the security gates at Norfolk, with credentials that identified her as Lisa Morgan, Communication Systems Contractor. The transformation was complete and immediate. Gone was any trace of the uncertain trainee who had endured mockery in a classroom. Lisa Morgan moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in high-security environments, spoke with the technical expertise of a communication specialist, and carried herself with the kind of professional competence that made security personnel wave her through checkpoints without question. Norfolk Naval Base was one of the largest military installations in the world, home to multiple aircraft carrier battle groups and the line of communication systems that coordinated naval operations across the globe. If hostile intelligence services could compromise or disrupt Norfolk's communication capabilities, they could interfere with American naval responses to crises anywhere in the world. Ms. Morgan, Lieutenant Commander Bradley Ross said as he escorted her to the communications center, "We appreciate you coming on such short notice. The system upgrades you're implementing will significantly improve our encrypted communication capabilities." Juniper, operating as Lisa Morgan, smiled professionally. These new systems represent significant advances in quantum encryption technology. Once implemented, they'll make it virtually impossible for hostile services to intercept or decode your communications. What she didn't mention was that the upgrades were actually sophisticated monitoring systems that would allow her to detect any unauthorized access to Norfolk's communication networks. If the hostile intelligence network had assets at Norfolk, the new systems would identify them within hours of activation. As she began working with Norfolk's communication specialists to install the monitoring equipment, Juniper was simultaneously analyzing the behavior patterns of everyone with access to classified systems. The psychological profiling skills that had allowed her to identify Sage Whitmore's vulnerabilities were now focused on detecting similar compromises among Norfolk personnel. The work was painstaking and required maintaining her technical cover while conducting counterintelligence surveillance of some of the most security-conscious personnel in the military. Any mistake in her technical knowledge or any suspicious behavior in her intelligence gathering could expose the entire operation. But within 6 hours of beginning work at Norfolk, the monitoring systems had identified anomalous communication patterns that suggested hostile network activity. Someone with access to Norfolk's classified systems was transmitting information to external contacts using sophisticated encryption methods designed to avoid detection by conventional security monitoring. If this story of hidden identity and secret missions has you questioning everything, there's another incredible tale about a janitor who turned out to be something completely unexpected that you need to see next. Click that video when this one ends. You won't believe what happens. The discovery at Norfolk confirmed that the hostile intelligence network was indeed preparing for coordinated action against American military capabilities. But identifying the compromised personnel required careful investigation that wouldn't alert the network to the ongoing counterintelligence operation. Juniper activated her secure communication system and transmitted a coded report to Director Stone. Primary target confirmed active. Initiating Phase 2 surveillance protocols. The response was immediate and urgent. Agent Flame, we've detected similar activity at Fort Gordon and Offutt. The network is accelerating their timeline. How quickly can you complete Norfolk assessment and deploy to secondary targets? The pressure was mounting exponentially. Instead of having days or weeks to carefully investigate the network's activities, they were now operating under what appeared to be a countdown towards some kind of coordinated action that could occur within hours. 12 hours for complete Norfolk assessment, Juniper replied. 6 hours minimum for actionable intelligence. Understood. Secondary transport is being arranged. We're running out of time. As Juniper worked to identify the compromised personnel at Norfolk, federal agents at Fort Carson were conducting intensive interrogations of Sage Whitmore that were revealing disturbing details about the scope and sophistication of the hostile intelligence network. The communication training, Sage explained through tears, Victor said it was perfect for what his organization needed. He said people trained in military communications could help his business with international consulting work. Agent Torres exchanged glances with her colleague. Did he ever ask you to recruit other trainees? To identify people who might be interested in part-time consulting work? Yes, Sage whispered. He was particularly interested in people who seemed unhappy with their military assignments or who had financial problems. He said those people would be most interested in legitimate opportunities to supplement their income. The recruitment strategy was classic intelligence tradecraft. Identify vulnerabilities, offer solutions that seem reasonable and legal, then gradually escalate the level of compromise until the target was completely controlled. What made this network particularly dangerous was the scale and coordination of their operations. How many other people did you discuss with Victor? Torres asked. Maybe a dozen, Sage replied. He wanted to know about their personalities, their problems, their relationships. He said it would help him determine who might be a good fit for his consulting business. The revelation that Sage had been conducting preliminary assessment of potential recruits meant that the network's penetration of American military personnel could be far more extensive than even the current investigation had revealed. Every person she had discussed with her foreign contact was now a potential security risk. Meanwhile, at Norfolk Naval Base, Juniper's investigation was yielding increasingly disturbing results. The compromised personnel weren't just transmitting routine intelligence. They were mapping the complete communication infrastructure of the base in ways that suggested preparation for a coordinated attack designed to completely disable Norfolk's operational capabilities. The level of detail is extraordinary, she reported to Director Stone during a secure communications session. They have documentation of every communication node, every backup system, every redundancy protocol. If they wanted to completely isolate Norfolk from external communication, they would know exactly how to do it. Similar patterns at Fort Gordon and Offutt? Intelligence suggests yes, but I need direct assessment to confirm. The sophistication suggests state-level resources and multi-year preparation. Director Stone's response carried the weight of decisions being made at the highest levels of government. Agent Flame, the President has been briefed on the situation. You have unlimited authority to take whatever action is necessary to prevent this network from completing their objectives. The authorization was both empowering and terrifying. Unlimited authority meant that Juniper could request resources, personnel, and support at levels that were normally reserved for the most critical national security crises. It also meant that the assessment of the threat was severe enough to justify almost any action necessary to counter it. As she prepared to complete her investigation at Norfolk and deploy to Fort Gordon, Juniper was also coordinating with federal agents who were simultaneously arresting compromised personnel at military installations across the country. The coordinated roundup was designed to prevent the network from completing their planned action, but it also risked alerting surviving network members that their operation had been compromised. The investigation at Norfolk had identified Petty Officer Second Class Derek Murphy as the primary compromised asset. Murphy had been recruited through financial pressure, gambling debts that made him vulnerable to offers of easy money in exchange for what seemed like harmless information sharing. I never thought it would hurt anyone, Murphy said during his arrest, his voice shaking with the realization of how completely he had been manipulated. They said it was just routine information about communication protocols, industrial espionage, not military intelligence. The pattern was consistent with what agents were discovering at other military installations. The network had targeted personnel with specific vulnerabilities, offered seemingly reasonable explanations for their requests, and gradually escalated the level of information sharing until their assets were providing detailed intelligence about critical military capabilities. But Murphy's arrest yielded intelligence that changed everything about how they understood the network's objectives. Hidden in his personal effects were communication devices that weren't just for transmitting information, they were for receiving and implementing coordinated action orders. These aren't just intelligence-gathering tools, the technical specialist analyzing Murphy's equipment reported. They're command and control devices designed to coordinate simultaneous actions across multiple locations. The discovery meant that the network wasn't just gathering intelligence for future use. They were preparing to implement coordinated attacks that could occur at any moment. The compromised personnel weren't just spies. They were potential saboteurs positioned to cripple American military communication capabilities during a crisis. Juniper received this intelligence while en route to Fort Gordon, and it fundamentally changed her mission parameters. Instead of just identifying compromised personnel, she now needed to determine whether the network was prepared to implement immediate attacks and what those attacks might involve. Agent Flame, Director Stone's voice carried new urgency through the secure communication system. We've just intercepted encrypted communications, suggesting activation orders may be transmitted within the next 6 hours. Whatever they're planning, it's about to happen. The revelation that they were operating under such a compressed timeline meant that careful investigation was no longer possible. Juniper would need to rapidly identify threats at Fort Gordon and Offutt Air Force Base, then coordinate immediate countermeasures to prevent the network from completing their objectives. Understood, she replied. Implementing emergency protocols. The emergency protocols represented the most aggressive counterintelligence techniques available to Echo 7 operatives. Instead of careful observation and gradual intelligence gathering, Juniper would need to rapidly penetrate the network's activities and neutralize their capabilities before they could implement whatever they were planning. At Fort Gordon, her cover identity as Captain Jennifer Hayes, cybersecurity specialist, provided access to the most sensitive computer systems on the installation. Fort Gordon was home to the Army's primary cyber warfare capabilities, and compromise of its systems could cripple American defensive and offensive cyber operations during a crisis. Captain Hayes, Major General Patricia Collins said during Juniper's briefing upon arrival, "Your timing is excellent. We've been experiencing some unusual network activity that we haven't been able to trace to its source." The admission that Fort Gordon's cybersecurity specialists couldn't identify the source of unusual network activity was deeply troubling. If the most sophisticated cyber warfare experts in the military couldn't detect hostile network penetration, the level of sophistication involved was extraordinary. "I'd like to begin with a comprehensive assessment of your most sensitive systems," Juniper replied, her technical expertise as Captain Hayes allowing her to speak with authority about cybersecurity protocols. Sometimes the most sophisticated attacks are designed to be invisible to conventional detection methods. What she found during her assessment was worse than anyone had expected. The hostile network hadn't just penetrated Fort Gordon's communication systems. They had installed sophisticated malware that could give them complete control over the installation's cyber warfare capabilities. If activated, the malware could turn Fort Gordon's own cyber weapons against American targets, while simultaneously crippling the installation's defensive capabilities. "This is unprecedented," she reported to Director Stone during an emergency communications session. "They haven't just compromised our systems, they've weaponized them. If this malware is activated simultaneously across multiple installations, it could cripple our entire military communication and cyber warfare infrastructure. How long to neutralize it? Hours for Fort Gordon alone. But if similar malware exists at other installations, we're looking at a coordinated attack that could fundamentally alter the strategic balance of power." The assessment was terrifying in its implications. The hostile intelligence network had spent years positioning assets and installing capabilities that could effectively paralyze American military response capabilities during a crisis. The level of planning and resource allocation suggested preparation for a major international conflict where initial advantage could determine the outcome. But even as Juniper worked to neutralize the malware at Fort Gordon, intelligence was arriving that suggested the network's plans were even more ambitious than anyone had realized. Satellite surveillance had detected unusual military activity near the borders of 3 different countries, suggesting that the cyber attack was being coordinated with potential conventional military actions. Agent Flame, General Hawkins' voice carried the weight of decisions being made at the highest levels of government. The Joint Chiefs are convening emergency session. Your intelligence is being briefed directly to the National Security Council. Whatever this network is planning, it appears to be the opening phase of a coordinated international crisis. The revelation that Juniper's counterintelligence operation had uncovered preparation for what could be a major international conflict elevated the mission to levels of importance that few operatives ever experienced. The decisions being made based on her intelligence could affect global stability and the security of millions of people. As she continued working to neutralize the cyber threats at Fort Gordon, Juniper was also coordinating with rapid response teams that were simultaneously addressing similar threats at military installations across the country. The scale of the coordinated response required resources and personnel from across the entire American intelligence and military establishment. But time was running out. Intercepted communications suggested that activation orders for the coordinated attack could be transmitted at any moment. And despite the progress being made at individual installations, the network's overall capabilities remained largely intact. Phase 3 deployment authorized, Director Stone announced during an emergency briefing. Agent Flame, you're cleared for immediate deployment to Offutt Air Force Base with full tactical support. This is now classified as a national security emergency with presidential oversight. The deployment to Offutt Air Force Base would be Juniper's most critical assignment. Offutt was home to Strategic Command, the military organization responsible for America's nuclear weapons and global strategic operations. If the hostile network could compromise or disrupt Strategic Command's capabilities, they could prevent American response to whatever larger operation they were planning. But as Juniper prepared for what could be the most important mission of her career, she was also receiving intelligence that suggested the network's true objectives were even more ambitious than anyone had imagined. This wasn't just about compromising military communications or cyber warfare capabilities. It was about fundamentally altering the global balance of power by demonstrating that American military superiority could be neutralized through intelligence operations and coordinated attack. The flight to Offutt Air Force Base was conducted under emergency protocols that reflected the critical nature of the mission. As Juniper reviewed her cover identity as Dr. Amanda Foster, behavioral psychologist, she was also analyzing intelligence reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of what they were facing. The hostile intelligence network represented more than just foreign espionage. It was preparation for what could be a new form of warfare that combined cyber attacks, intelligence operations, and psychological manipulation to achieve strategic objectives without conventional military confrontation. If successful, such operations could reshape international relations by demonstrating that traditional military power could be neutralized through asymmetric attacks on communication and command systems. Dr. Foster, Colonel Robert Manning said as he met Juniper at Offutt's security checkpoint, "We appreciate your rapid response to our security assessment request. The behavioral patterns we've been observing among certain personnel have been concerning our security specialists." The admission that Offutt's security personnel had noticed concerning behavioral patterns suggested that the hostile network's activities were becoming more obvious as they approached activation. Personnel who had been maintaining careful cover for months or years were now showing signs of stress and unusual behavior as they prepared to implement whatever actions they had been assigned. "I'd like to begin with interviews of the personnel who have shown the most significant behavioral changes," Juniper replied, her expertise as Dr. Foster allowing her to speak with authority about psychological assessment techniques. Often the most subtle changes can indicate the most significant security risks. What she discovered during her assessment was the most sophisticated infiltration operation she had ever encountered. The network hadn't just recruited individual assets at Offutt, they had created an entire cell of compromised personnel who could coordinate their actions to completely disable Strategic Command's operational capabilities. The cell included personnel with access to communication systems, computer networks, physical security protocols, and even nuclear weapon command authority. If activated simultaneously, they could create a complete breakdown of Strategic Command's ability to coordinate American strategic responses during a crisis. "This changes everything," she reported to Director Stone during an emergency communication session. "We're not dealing with individual compromised assets. We're dealing with coordinated cells that can completely neutralize critical military capabilities. If similar cells exist at other strategic installations, American military power could be effectively neutralized through coordinated insider attacks. Intelligence suggests similar cells at Pacific Command, European Command, and Special Operations Command, Stone replied grimly. Agent Flame, you're looking at the most sophisticated intelligence operation in modern history. The level of coordination and resource allocation suggests years of preparation for what could be a fundamental shift in global power dynamics. As Juniper worked to identify and neutralize the cell at Offutt, she was also coordinating with similar operations at military installations around the world. The scope of the network had expanded far beyond what anyone had initially imagined, involving compromised personnel at American military facilities on multiple continents. But the real shock came when intelligence analysis revealed the true timeline for the network's planned activation. Intercepted communications suggested that coordinated attacks could begin within hours, designed to coincide with conventional military actions that would test American response capabilities, while critical communication and command systems were compromised. Agent Flame, General Hawkins's voice carried the urgency of decisions being made at the highest levels of government. The President has authorized immediate implementation of emergency response protocols. You have full authority to take whatever action is necessary to prevent this network from completing their objectives, up to and including lethal force against compromised personnel. The authorization represented the most extreme measures available to counterintelligence operatives, reserved for situations where national survival was at stake. The fact that such authorization had been granted indicated that the assessment of the threat had reached the highest possible levels of concern. As Juniper prepared to neutralize the cell at Offutt, she was also receiving intelligence that revealed the true scope of what they were facing. The hostile intelligence network represented preparation for what intelligence analysts were calling a hybrid warfare scenario that combined cyber attacks, insider sabotage, psychological operations, and conventional military pressure to achieve strategic objectives without direct military confrontation. The coordinated nature of this operation, Director Stone explained during an emergency briefing that included senior officials from across the intelligence community, suggests state-level sponsorship with resources and planning capabilities that rival our own intelligence operations. We're dealing with an adversary that has spent years studying our capabilities and developing specific countermeasures. The revelation that they were facing such a sophisticated and well-resourced adversary elevated the counterintelligence operation to levels of importance that required coordination with international allies and deployment of resources that were normally reserved for the most critical national security crises. But even as massive resources were being deployed to counter the network's activities, time was running out for preventing their planned attacks. Intelligence suggested that activation orders could be transmitted at any moment. And despite the progress being made at individual installations, the network's overall capabilities remained largely intact. The next phase of the operation would require Juniper to coordinate simultaneous actions across multiple installations while maintaining her cover identities and avoiding detection by network members who were now operating under what appeared to be emergency protocols of their own. Agent Flame, Director Stone's final communication, carried the weight of decisions that could affect global stability. You are authorized to implement Echo 7 emergency protocols with full governmental support. Whatever happens in the next few hours will determine whether this network succeeds in fundamentally altering global power dynamics or whether American military capabilities remain intact. As Juniper prepared for what could be the most critical hours of her career, she was also reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a mock trainee in a classroom at Fort Carson to the front lines of what could be the most important counterintelligence operation in modern history. The flame tattoo on her arm pulsed with soft light as it responded to encrypted communications that contained the final operational parameters for what intelligence analysts were now calling Operation Firebreak. The coordinated effort to prevent the hostile network from implementing their planned attacks on American military capabilities. But as she moved through Offutt Air Force Base with the confidence of Dr. Amanda Foster, behavioral psychologist, Juniper was also preparing for the possibility that despite all their efforts, the network might succeed in implementing at least part of their planned attacks. If that happened, her role would shift from prevention to damage limitation, and ensuring that American military capabilities could be restored as quickly as possible. The war in the shadows was reaching its climax, and the outcome would determine not just the success or failure of a single intelligence operation, but the future balance of global power in an increasingly complex and dangerous world. In exactly 3 hours and 17 minutes, coordinated attacks would begin at military installations across 3 continents. The question was whether Agent Flame and the massive counterintelligence operation she had helped initiate would be enough to prevent what could be the most significant compromise of American military capabilities in history. The flame tattoo pulsed once more, this time in response to an incoming message that would determine the final phase of Operation Firebreak. Around the world, deep cover operatives were emerging from years of careful concealment to engage in the kind of high-stakes intelligence warfare that could reshape the future of international conflict. Some fires, Juniper reflected, as she prepared for whatever came next, burned brightest in the darkness. And sometimes, those fires were the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. The real war was just beginning. Operation Firebreak reached its crescendo at exactly 2300 hours when coordinated strikes neutralized hostile network cells across 17 military installations simultaneously. At Offutt Air Force Base, Juniper's identification of the compromised personnel had allowed federal agents to prevent what could have been catastrophic sabotage of Strategic Command's nuclear communication systems. The scope of what they had prevented became clear only in the aftermath. Intelligence recovered from captured network members revealed plans for coordinated attacks that would have crippled American military response capabilities for weeks, potentially months. The hostile intelligence services had intended to demonstrate that traditional military superiority could be neutralized through carefully planned infiltration and sabotage operations. The damage assessment is complete, Director Stone announced during the post-operation briefing 3 days later. Agent Flame, your intelligence gathering and rapid response prevented what analysts are calling the most significant threat to American military capabilities since Pearl Harbor. But victory came with costs that extended far beyond the immediate operational success. The revelation that hostile intelligence networks could penetrate American military installations so thoroughly required fundamental changes to how the military approached personnel security and operational protocols. Back at Fort Carson, the consequences were rippling through every level of the organization. Colonel Ashford found himself promoted to head a new counterintelligence training program that would prepare the next generation of military personnel to recognize and resist sophisticated recruitment attempts by hostile intelligence services. The old assumptions about security are no longer sufficient, he explained to the first class of the new program. We must assume that our adversaries will attempt to recruit our personnel, and we must build systems that can detect and prevent such recruitment while maintaining the trust and cooperation necessary for effective military operations. Colt Stedman had indeed been accepted into the specialized program he had requested, but the training was proving to be everything Colonel Ashford had warned and more. The psychological preparation alone required him to confront not just his own limitations and biases, but the fundamental assumptions he had held about strength, courage, and service. Real strength, his instructor explained during a particularly challenging psychological assessment, isn't about never showing vulnerability. It's about maintaining your core values and mission focus, even when everything else is uncertain or compromised. The lesson resonated with Colt's memory of Juniper, enduring months of mockery while never losing sight of her actual mission. The ability to maintain professional focus while absorbing personal attacks was proving to be one of the most difficult skills to develop, requiring a level of psychological discipline that few people possess. Knox Sterling had accepted an offer to join the Army's Cyber Intelligence Division, where his skills in information gathering and analysis were being developed for use against sophisticated hostile networks. His research abilities, which had once been directed towards satisfying curiosity, were now focused on identifying and countering threats to national security. The same skills that allowed you to research Echo 7 operations, his supervisor explained, can be applied to tracking hostile intelligence networks and identifying their operational patterns. The difference is that now your research has the potential to save lives and protect national security. Harper Walsh found herself assigned to a behavioral analysis unit that supported counterintelligence operations by developing psychological profiles of potential recruitment targets and hostile operatives. Her insights into the emotional factors that had made Sage vulnerable to recruitment were proving valuable in developing training programs that could help military personnel recognize and resist similar approaches. The institutional changes extended far beyond individual assignments. The military was implementing comprehensive new security protocols that assumed hostile intelligence services would attempt to recruit personnel at every level of the organization. The changes represented a fundamental shift from reactive security measures to proactive systems designed to identify and prevent compromise before it could occur. "We're not just changing procedures," General Hawkins explained during a briefing to senior military leadership. "We're changing the culture of how we approach security. Every person with access to classified information must understand that they are a potential target and must be prepared to recognize and report recruitment attempts." 3 months after Operation Firebreak, Juniper received a new assignment that would take her deep undercover once again. But this time, she wouldn't be operating alone. The success of the Fort Carson operation had led to the creation of a new program that paired experienced Echo 7 operatives with carefully selected trainees for extended deep cover missions. "Agent Flame," Director Stone said during the mission briefing, "your first trainee has been selected based on his performance during the psychological evaluation process and his demonstrated ability to learn from difficult experiences." Colt Stedman entered the briefing room with the kind of quiet confidence that came from months of intensive training, designed to strip away ego and replace it with professional competence. The transformation from the swaggering sergeant who had mocked Juniper's tattoo was complete and remarkable. "Sir," he said, addressing Juniper with the respect of someone who understood exactly what he was in the presence of, "I'm ready for assignment." Juniper studied her former tormentor with the analytical gaze that had identified Sage's vulnerabilities and countless other threats over the years. What she saw was genuine transformation, not just behavioral change, but fundamental psychological development that suggested real potential for the kind of work that required absolute integrity and unshakable dedication to mission objectives. "The mission will require you to maintain cover identities for potentially years," she explained. "You'll be separated from everything familiar, unable to contact family or friends, living as someone completely different from who you really are. Are you prepared for that level of sacrifice?" "Yes, ma'am," Colt replied without hesitation. "You showed me what real service looks like. I want the chance to prove I'm worthy of that example." The assignment would take them to Eastern Europe, where intelligence indicated that the hostile network was attempting to rebuild their capabilities using more sophisticated recruitment and operational techniques. The mission would require them to penetrate the network at its source while maintaining cover identities that could withstand the kind of scrutiny that had exposed previous operations. As they prepared for deployment, Juniper reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. The classroom at Fort Carson seemed like a lifetime ago, but the lessons learned there continued to influence everything that followed. "Judgment is a luxury warriors can't afford," she told Colt, as they reviewed their cover identities and operational parameters. "The moment you decide you understand someone based on surface appearances is the moment you become vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation that compromised Sage and dozens of others." "I understand, ma'am," he replied. "I won't make that mistake again." But even as they prepared for their new mission, intelligence was arriving that suggested the hostile network was adapting to the lessons learned from Operation Firebreak. New recruitment techniques, more sophisticated operational security, and what appeared to be even greater resource allocation suggested that the victory at Fort Carson was just the opening engagement in a much larger and more complex conflict. Juniper's secure communication device chimed with an incoming priority message as they completed their mission briefing. The encrypted text contained coordinates for a meeting location and a single word that made her blood run cold: resurrection. "What is it?" Colt asked, noticing her expression. "Evidence that our adversaries are more resourceful than we hoped," she replied grimly. "The network we thought we destroyed appears to have been just one component of something much larger." The implications were staggering. If Operation Firebreak had targeted only part of a larger intelligence network, then the hostile capabilities they faced were far more extensive than anyone had realized. The victory at Fort Carson might have been exactly what their adversaries had intended: a way to identify and assess American counterintelligence capabilities while preserving their most valuable assets and operations. As they prepared to deploy to their new assignment, both Juniper and Colt understood that they were stepping into a conflict that could last for years and might determine the future balance of global power. The skills and dedication required for such missions represented the highest levels of service and sacrifice that any democracy could ask of its protectors. Agent Flame, Director Stone said during their final briefing, the President has asked me to convey his personal appreciation for your service and to ensure you understand that the nation's security depends on the success of this mission. Juniper nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with such recognition. But she also felt the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she had been trained to do. Some fires never go out, she said quietly, touching the flame tattoo that had started this entire journey. They just wait for the right moment to burn bright again. The war in the shadows would continue, fought by people whose names would never be known and whose sacrifices would never be publicly recognized. But in classrooms and training facilities around the world, their legacy would live on in the form of better security, improved training, and a deeper understanding of the price that freedom required. The real war was just beginning, but America's guardians were ready.